All right, hi everybody. This is the beginning of my series on me covering a bunch of different forms of audio equipment, something that I find very interesting. There's certain equipment that people use for processing audio that's very common. So that's basically what this series is going to be about. I decided to start the series off with a super famous compressor. It's an audio compressor called the LA-2A. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it. The compressor is basically as simple as it gets. It only has two knobs on there. It's kind of one thing it's famous for. It has a peak reduction knob and a gain makeup knob. So we'll get into that a little bit more into this guide here. Basically, just kind of if you want to figure out how it's working, a little bit of the history of it. It was invented by this guy named James Lawrence or Jim Lawrence. He's working at JPL and he worked on a couple of missile programs and things, and eventually he found himself working in a radio studio, and he got really mad because every time people were trying to record things, sometimes they'd be really quiet, sometimes they'd be very loud, and he got sick of trying to slide those faders up and down, trying to keep the level consistent. So that kind of gives you an idea of what this thing is for. If you have someone that's really quiet and then super loud, or maybe a bass line that's super quiet and super loud, this will help kind of smooth everything out. So it's kind of like having an automatic finger that's on a fader that's sliding up and down, trying to keep the level consistent. So it does that by using this thing called a T4 cell. It's kind of like imagine the more signal that you put in to this machine, the higher the signal, not necessarily the volume, but the higher the signal that goes into the machine, this light inside will glow brighter, and then it slowly stops glowing. And as that happens, it controls the level. So if the little light is glowing, the harder it glows, the more of the signal it's going to reduce. And then as the signal goes away, it lets more of the signal out. One cool thing about this machine and why it's been around for a very long time is the way that light basically shines and how the light dissolves. So the light goes away. It gives whatever kind of music you're putting through it like a really musical character. So that's kind of what gives it its sound. It's really good for vocals. It's really good for bass. It's kind of good for anything really. It adds a little bit of harmonics, but it does it relatively cleanly. That's basically what it does is it keeps the level consistent. So in the unit, the attack time, which is about how fast this thing clamps down on level, how fast it'll turn down what you're putting into it in a way, how fast it reduces the gain is around 10 milliseconds. And the amount of time that it takes your signal to be uncompressed and come back and be untouched by this thing is really dependent. It's called program dependent. It really depends on how hard you hit it with the signal, how loud the signal is there, what kind of signal it is. It's called program dependent. So depending on what goes into this machine, the release time basically is built into the machine. You can't control it, but that's one thing that people like about it because the way it releases any sound that you put into it is very musical. Like it has a really cool kind of sound. Like it releases things in a very unique way, and it's all dependent on what you put into it. That's kind of one thing that makes this thing unique. So basically, here's an example of it in action. You can see that if you put in a very low level signal, it'll just pass through the machine. It might add some extra dynamics. Here we're using just the UAD plugin version of it. But basically, if you put something in and you don't see any movement on the needle, which means there's no gain reduction happening, technically it's not really doing anything to your audio in the compression sense. Passing through the machine, whether you have the hardware or maybe other plugins, might emulate kind of the sound that this thing gives, which it does give a sound. It's very slight, as you can hear. But that's not really, its main use. Its main use is as a compressor. So you see here, if you put in something that is a little louder and you reduce the peak reduction knob, so if you turn that knob to the right, the higher the number, that means the more peak reduction you're doing. So that is basically lowering the threshold. And as soon as that threshold touches your audio, it'll start with the peaks, and then you keep turning the peak reduction up, and it's going to reduce your audio more and more and more. And the more of your signal that it catches there, you'll see that it starts to reduce your material more and more and more. This will lower the volume temporarily, and that's the purpose of the other knob. because as you're reducing the gain, you can make it up again by turning the knob on the left, the gain knob. You can increase that, and that will bring it back to the original level. So like in all things, it's really important to, anytime you do any sort of processing, any sort of plugin, anything like that, make sure you always match the levels, because if something makes something louder, you're always going to think it just is better. You'll think it sounds better, when in reality, that's not really true. So yeah, if you kind of want to see what it's doing, make sure that before you apply it and after you apply it, that the relative signal is about the same volume. That way you can kind of get an accurate understanding of what's going on. In this last example, you see if we really push this thing, if the input signal is super high going into it, it's going to reduce the gain by quite a bit. So this is really saturating it. If you could go inside the machine, you would see that the T4 cell, the optical cell, which is why it's called an optical compressor, this machine, basically it'll be soaking in and glowing brighter, which means it'll fade away and go back to basically not being lit slower. So the harder you push the machine, the longer it'll take for it to uncompress. So that little needle will slide back slower. And that speed, that's why it's called program dependent. It's completely set by physics. It's literally a light that's glowing out. So it's not set, it's not hard time. It's not like 10 milliseconds or 15 milliseconds. It's literally just, unglowing. So you can see here that if you push it super hard, it'll take a long time for it to go back to 0. So yeah, that's basically it. This is just a beginning. I'm just starting, and I'm going to be doing other forms of equipment, going more in depth, kind of doing a little exploration of like the face panels and what the knobs do, and kind of like brief little demos on audio, so you can kind of hear in general how these things are affecting your audio and what they'd be good on. I decided to start with this one. It's super easy. It's just 2 knobs. It's definitely a classic machine. A lot of people use it for many different reasons. It's really popular on vocals. A lot of times people will put this one and other compressors in a line, I guess you could say, and each one will be doing a little bit to try to get like a really nice vocal sound. It's really popular on bass tracks as well. Yeah, it's been used on basically tons of records, really famous records. And yeah, I definitely recommend having some sort of optical compressor of any kind. They're really good they're easy because you don't have to really set numbers too much. If you're the kind of person thinking like, oh, I need to put 10 milliseconds or 25 milliseconds, that's not really what this compressor is about. And a lot of times it's not really musical to think of it so, in concrete terms. So this one's kind of cool because it just put your music into it and it'll do something and spit it back out. And a lot of times not thinking about it too much is actually a good thing. So yeah, if you have any suggestions or any comments or anything that maybe a future piece of hardware you want me to explore, just make sure you post that in the comments so I can kind of see and maybe have some direction with that. If not, I'll be putting this out every once in a while and kind of just exploring equipment and the history of equipment and small little demos on what they do. Thank you.